Amanda Reed never imagined her life would change completely because of a simple table mishap in a busy Manhattan cafe. At 32, she was a veteran firefighter with the New York City Fire Department, with 8 years of dedicated service to Ladder Company 15 in Lower Manhattan. Her muscular arms and calloused hands told stories of countless rescues, fires fought, and lives saved. But in that fall of 2023, Amanda faced her own personal crisis that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. The situation began 6 months earlier when her mother in Buffalo suffered a devastating stroke. As an only child, Amanda assumed all the financial responsibilities of the treatment, including intensive physical therapy and expensive medications that insurance refused to cover. She had exhausted her savings, maxed out her credit cards, and even borrowed money from colleagues. Her salary as a firefighter, while decent, simply couldn't keep up with the soaring medical expenses, which reached over $15,000 a month. On that cold October morning, Amanda walked into the Bluestone Lane Cafe near Union Square, exhausted after a particularly brutal night shift that included 3 fire calls and a complicated car accident rescue on FDR Drive. Her back ached, her eyes burned with fatigue, and she desperately needed a strong coffee before catching the subway to the hospital, where her mother was admitted for another round of therapy. The cafe was crowded as always, with hurried professionals grabbing their orders before work. She ordered a double espresso and a croissant, using the last $10 she had in her wallet until her next paycheck in 3 days. When her order was ready, Amanda frantically searched for a free table. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and she knew that if she didn't sit down soon, she might faint right there. That's when she saw a small table in the corner, with only one person sitting on it, a young man in a wheelchair who seemed to be working on a laptop. Without much thought, and driven by extreme exhaustion, Amanda approached and asked if she could share the table. The man looked up, revealing a strikingly handsome face with piercing green eyes and slightly tousled brown hair. He hesitated for a moment, seeming surprised by the request, but then nodded and moved some papers to make room. Amanda slumped into her chair with a sigh of relief, murmuring a thank you as her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her coffee. She hadn't noticed immediately, but she was sitting at the table reserved with a small gold sign that read, "Reserved." She was so tired she hadn't even noticed the detail. The man watched her discreetly as she took long sips of coffee, her eyes closed in pure relief. He noticed the uniform partially visible beneath her winter coat, the FDNY emblem stitched on her shoulder, the soot marks still visible on her neck, despite her clear attempts to wipe them off. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke in a soft but curious voice. "Difficult shift?" Amanda opened her eyes, surprised that he had initiated a conversation. She looked at him properly for the first time, noticing not only his attractive face, but also the obviously expensive quality of his electric wheelchair and the designer clothes he was casually wearing. "You have no idea," she replied with a tired smile. 3 fires and an accident rescue. Sometimes it feels like the whole city is trying to self-destruct in a single night. He smiled back, and there was something genuine in his expression that made her relax. "I'm Amanda, by the way. Sorry to barge into your desk like this. I know it's kind of rude, but my legs just couldn't stand anymore." "Don't worry," he said. "I'm Ethan. And no, you're not intruding. In fact, it's good to have company." There was a note of loneliness in his voice that Amanda recognized immediately. It was the same tone she heard in herself lately, that feeling of being completely overwhelmed and isolated, despite being surrounded by millions of people. They started chatting lightly at first. Ethan asked about her work, showing genuine interest in the stories she told about rescues and the camaraderie at the firehouse. Amanda was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him, how he asked intelligent questions, and seemed genuinely concerned about her answers. He didn't have that air of superiority she often encountered in wealthy Manhattanites, even though it was obvious, from his clothes and appearance, that he came from a very different background than hers. In turn, Ethan spoke briefly about his work at a non-profit organization that helped people with disabilities find employment and affordable housing. He didn't mention that he was the founder and had invested millions of his own inheritance in the project. Nor did he mention that his father was Richard Morrison, the commissioner of the New York City Fire Department, Amanda's own boss several levels above her, in the hierarchy. Amanda glanced at her watch and realized with horror that she was late. She needed to be at the hospital in 20 minutes and still had to catch the subway. She stood up quickly, almost spilling her empty coffee in the process. "Damn it. Sorry. I really need to go. It was great meeting you, Ethan." He seemed disappointed. "Do you come here often?" The question came out more hopefully than he intended. Amanda paused, her coat half up on. "Honestly, I can't afford to come here. Often. Today was a luxury I probably shouldn't have allowed myself." She smiled tensely, revealing more than she intended about her financial situation. Something on Ethan's face shifted, an understanding settling in. "Well, if you come back, I'm usually here on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. It would be nice to talk again." Amanda nodded, already rushing towards the door, her mind drifting back to the medical bills and her mother's physical therapy session. She didn't think much about the meeting in the following days. Her life was a constant race between work, the hospital, and trying to get a few hours of sleep between shifts. But the following Tuesday, when she finished another brutal night shift, her feet automatically led her back to the same cafe. She told herself it was only because it was on her way to the hospital, but there was a small part of her that hoped to see Ethan again. And there he was, at the same table in the corner, working on his laptop as before. This time, Amanda noticed the reserved sign, but Ethan waved to her enthusiastically as soon as he saw her, clearly indicating that she should join him. She ordered only a black coffee this time. The croissant was out of her tight budget, and she sat down at the table with a tired but genuine smile. "You're back," Ethan said, and there was a joy in his voice that surprised her. "I was hoping you'd come back." They talked again, this time more deeply. Amanda found herself talking about her mother, about the overwhelming financial pressure, about how she loved her job, but was beginning to wonder if she would need to look for a second job or even leave the fire department for something that paid better. Ethan listened attentively, his expression serious and empathetic. He told her about his own accident 5 years earlier, a car crash that left his legs paralyzed and changed his entire life. He spoke of the depression that consumed him, how it took him years to find a new purpose, and how his current job was his way of transforming tragedy into something meaningful. "My father didn't understand at first," Ethan said calmly. "He wanted me to join his company, to take over his legacy, but I needed to do something of my own, you know? Something that mattered in a different way." Amanda nodded, understanding perfectly. "That's how I feel about being a firefighter. My high school friends thought I was crazy for not going to college, for choosing such a dangerous job. But when you save a life, when you pull a child from a burning building, there's no better feeling in the world." They met again on Thursday, and the following Tuesday, and the Thursday after that. It became a precious routine in their chaotic lives. For Amanda, those conversations with Ethan became a lifeboat, an hour a week where she could simply be herself, not a firefighter, not a desperate daughter trying to save her mother, just Amanda. For Ethan, who had socially isolated himself since his accident, the conversations with Amanda were a breath of fresh air, a genuine connection with someone who saw him as a person, not as the commissioner's rich and disabled son. A month passed like this, and then came the Thursday that would change everything. Amanda arrived at the cafe visibly upset, her eyes red from crying. Ethan immediately became concerned, moving his chair closer to hers as she collapsed into the chair. "What happened?" he asked gently. Amanda let out a sob she had been trying to suppress. "They're going to shut down my mother's treatment. The hospital said that if I don't pay the $23,000 I owe by Friday, they're going to transfer her to a public facility where she won't receive the specialized physical therapy that's working. The doctor said that without this treatment, she'll never regain function on her right side." Her voice broke. "And I don't have the money. I sold everything of value. My car, my jewelry, even my ex's engagement ring. I have nothing left." Ethan felt his heart clench. He had grown up privileged, never experienced this kind of financial desperation. But his mother had died of cancer when he was 15, and he knew that feeling of helplessness, of watching someone you love suffer without being able to do anything, without thinking about the consequences. He picked up his phone. "How much do you need exactly?" Amanda looked at him in confusion. $23,000 now, but it will be $15,000 more per month for the next 6 months of treatment. "Why?" Ethan was typing on his phone. "Give me the name of the hospital and your mother's account number." Amanda looked at him as if he had gone mad. "Ethan, I can't accept money from you. I barely know you, and that's an absurd amount of money. Consider an interest-free loan then," he said firmly. "You can pay me back when your mother is better, and you've recovered financially. But she won't miss out on this treatment." He paused, his penetrating gaze meeting hers. "Amanda, I lost my mother because the treatment that could have saved her was still in experimental trials, and our insurance didn't cover it. My father had the money to pay out of pocket, but at the time he was so focused on his career, so convinced that the doctors at the hospital knew better, that when he finally decided to seek alternative treatments, it was too late. I was 15, and I watched my mother die, knowing that with different resources, she could have had a chance. I'm not going to sit by and watch you go through the same thing when I can help. Amanda started crying for real then, big tears rolling down her face. I can't ask that of you. It's too much money. I don't know when I could pay it back. Ethan took her hand on the table, squeezing it gently. Then you'll pay me back when you can. Or maybe you'll save someone's life at work and say we're even. Amanda, please, let me do this. She looked at the man who had been essentially a stranger just a month before, but who now seemed to be the only person who truly understood her pain, and she nodded. Ethan made a few calls right there, transferring the money immediately. The relief Amanda felt was so intense she almost fainted. For the first time in months, she was able to breathe properly. But what none of them knew was that the cafe manager had recognized Ethan weeks earlier, knew exactly who he was, and had discreetly informed Ethan's father, Richard Morrison, that his son was spending a lot of time with an unknown female firefighter. Richard, ever protective of his only son since the accident, decided to investigate. He asked his assistant to find out everything about Amanda Reed. The report arrived on his desk 2 days after Ethan transferred the money to Amanda. Richard read with growing concern about Amanda's desperate financial situation, her massive debts, and now this substantial transfer from his son to her, to a protective father of a vulnerable child with significant financial resources. It seemed like a classic exploitation scenario. He didn't know the Amanda Ethan knew, didn't know about her integrity or the genuine conversations they shared. He only saw numbers on a page that told a story of a desperate woman receiving a large sum of money from her naive son. Richard decided to act. He summoned Amanda to his office at FDNY Command Center the following Friday. Amanda had no idea what to expect when she received the summons. She assumed it was about some work procedure, perhaps even a commendation for the difficult rescue she had carried out the previous week. She donned her dress uniform and went to the office nervously, but without real concern. When she entered the impressive office overlooking Lower Manhattan, Richard Morrison stood behind his desk, his posture rigid and his face stern. "Firefighter Reed, take a seat," he said formally. Amanda sat down, her confusion growing. "Sir, may I ask what this is about?" Richard walked to the window, his hands behind his back. "It concerns my son, Ethan Morrison, and the transfer of $113,000 he made to you over the past 2 weeks. Amanda's blood ran cold. She hadn't made the connection before, hadn't linked Ethan to the Morrison surname. Ethan never mentioned his father, and she was so absorbed in her own problems that she never thought to ask about his family beyond what he volunteered for. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Ethan lent me money for my mother's treatment. I'll pay him back." Richard turned sharply. "You really expect me to believe it's a coincidence that you sat at my son's reserved table, struck up a friendship with him, and suddenly he's giving you over $100,000? His voice was cold and accusatory. "My son is paraplegic, Firefighter Reed. He's vulnerable, both emotionally and financially, and you took advantage of that." Amanda stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "That's not true. I didn't even know who he was. I sat at that table because I was exhausted, and it was the only one available. Our friendship is real." Richard gave a bitter smile. "A convenient friendship that resulted in you solving all his financial problems. Do you know how much firefighters earn over an entire career? You just received 2 years' salary from my son in a matter of weeks." "It was a loan," Amanda insisted, her voice breaking. "I'll pay every cent back." Richard returned to his desk, pulling out a document. "That won't be necessary. I've already transferred the money back to Ethan's account, and now I'll offer you a choice. You can voluntarily leave my son alone, never contact him again, and will continue pretending this was a misunderstanding. Or I can make your professional life very difficult. Not direct threats, understand, but there are countless ways to make a career at the FDNY uncomfortable for someone who doesn't fit the culture." Amanda felt the room spin. "You can't do this. I didn't do anything wrong." Richard leaned across the table. "I'm the commissioner of the New York City Fire Department, Firefighter Reed. I can do far more than you realize, and I will protect my son from opportunistic people by any means necessary." He paused, his gaze softening slightly. Look, I understand you're in a difficult situation with your mother, but Ethan has been through enough trauma. He doesn't need someone in his life who's there for the money. I'm not in his life for the money, Amanda said, tears of anger and humiliation streaming down her face. I care about him. He's my friend, a true friend. Richard shook his head. Then prove it by walking away. If your feelings are genuine, you won't want to cause him trouble with his family. You know that's what's best for him. Amanda looked at the powerful man before her and realized she was in a battle she couldn't win. She nodded slowly, defeated. Fine, I'll stay away. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. But you're wrong about me, and you're wrong about your son too. Ethan is stronger and more capable than you think. He doesn't need to be shielded from the world. He needs to be allowed to live in it. She left before Richard could respond, her legs barely carrying her out of the building. Amanda didn't return to the cafe. She changed her routes to the hospital, avoiding anywhere she might accidentally run into Ethan. She blocked his number when he tried to call, ignored his increasingly worried texts. It hurt more than she expected, feeling like she'd lost a precious friend. But she told herself it was for the best. She couldn't compete with Ethan's father's power and resources, and she wasn't going to cause Ethan any trouble by trying. For Ethan, Amanda's sudden silence was devastating. He didn't understand what had happened, why she had disappeared so completely from his life. He went to the cafe every day for 2 weeks, hoping she would show up. He called the hospital and found out that his mother's treatment had been stopped, the money refunded. He tried to find Amanda's address, but all his attempts were blocked. He began to despair, worried that something terrible had happened to her. It wasn't until he confronted his father 3 weeks later, demanding to know if Richard had anything to do with Amanda's disappearance, that the truth finally came out. The ensuing argument was epic, the worst fight father and son had ever had. Ethan accused Richard of being controlling and treating him like a helpless child. Richard insisted he was only protecting his son from being exploited. The argument ended with Ethan leaving his father's house, moving into his own apartment, and cutting off almost all contact with Richard. But the void left by Amanda didn't lessen, and for Amanda, desperately trying to maintain her mother's treatment at an inferior public hospital while working overtime at the fire department, the loss of Ethan's friendship was a constant pain. 2 months passed like this, both miserable, both feeling an emptiness they couldn't fill. And then came that shift that would change everything again. A massive fire in a residential building in Midtown, 40 floors of flames and smoke, hundreds of people trapped. Amanda and her team were among the first to arrive, rushing into the building without hesitation. She had just rescued a family of 4 from the 15th floor when she heard on the radio about a man in a wheelchair trapped on the 22nd floor, unable to use the stairs, the elevators disabled by the fire. Her heart stopped. 22nd floor, wheelchair. She didn't know if it was Ethan, but she couldn't risk it. Without waiting for orders, she ran back into the building, climbing the burning stairs with a speed born of pure terror. And when she found Ethan Morrison surrounded by flames in his apartment, unable to reach the exit because his chair couldn't overcome the fallen debris, she knew this was the moment her whole life had been preparing her for. Amanda didn't think twice. She ran through the flames, her protective gear saving her from the intense temperatures that melted the plastic and burned everything around her. Ethan was in the corner of his room, his wheelchair blocked by a beam that had fallen from the ceiling, his eyes wide with panic and smoke. When he saw her, his expression changed from terror to pure astonishment. "Amanda?" Her voice was hoarse from the smoke. "What are you doing?" "Here?" She didn't answer, only quickly assessed the situation. The beam was too heavy to move alone, and completely blocked the chair's path. She would have to carry Ethan in her arms. "I need to get you out of that chair now," she shouted over the roar of the fire. "Do you trust me?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. Despite everything that had happened, despite the months of silence, he trusted her completely. Amanda worked quickly, unbuckled the belts that held him securely in the chair, sliding her arms under his legs and back. He was heavier than she had expected. Pure upper body muscle developed from years of using a wheelchair, but his training had taken over. She lifted him against her chest, holding him firmly as she maneuvered around the fallen beam. The way back through the apartment was treacherous. The fire had spread, blocking the front door. Amanda had to think fast, her years of experience guiding her automatically. There was a window in the bedroom, and she could see an outside fire escape. She carried Ethan through the thick smoke, his lungs burning despite the oxygen mask, his body protesting against the weight and the extreme effort after hours of continuous work. When she finally reached the window, smashing the glass with her axe and helping Ethan through the opening to the fire escape, her strength was nearly gone, but she couldn't stop now. The fire escape was partially damaged by the heat. Some steps melted and unstable. She would have to descend. 22 flights of stairs carrying Ethan, testing each step before entrusting her weight to him. "Amanda, you're not going to be able to carry me up 22 flights of stairs," Ethan said, his voice strained with concern. "You're exhausted. Leave me here and send someone with proper equipment." She looked him straight in the eyes, her fierce determination visible even through the soot covering her face. "I'm not going to leave you here to die, Ethan. Not after everything. So you're going. To be quiet and let me do my job." The descent was the hardest thing Amanda had ever done in her career. Each step was agony, her muscles trembling, her arms burning with the constant effort. Ethan tried to help as best he could, using his strong arms to hold on to her and distribute her weight better, but even so, it was a brutal battle against gravity, exhaustion, and time. The fire was spreading rapidly, and they could hear periodic explosions from above as apartments succumbed to the flames. On the 10th floor, Amanda stumbled, her foot meeting a partially melted step that gave way under her weight. For a terrifying moment, they began to fall, but Ethan gripped the stair railing with superhuman strength, holding them both, while Amanda regained her balance. They lay there for a moment, breathing heavily, their hearts racing. "Thank you," she whispered. "We're in this together," he replied firmly. They continued descending, floor after floor, Amanda refusing to give up despite every muscle in her body screaming for relief. On the 5th floor, other firefighters finally caught up with them, climbing up with equipment to help. They offered to take over, but Amanda stubbornly shook her head. She had started this rescue, and she was going to finish it. All she accepted was a bottle of water and a brief moment to catch her breath. When they finally reached the ground, Amanda's legs gave way. She gently set Ethan down before collapsing beside him, every part of her body trembling with exhaustion. Paramedics rushed to them immediately, checking vital signs, offering oxygen. But Amanda and Ethan just looked at each other, years of unspoken emotions flashing between them in that moment. "You saved my life," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "Why did you just disappear? Where have you been?" Amanda closed her eyes, tears mingling with the soot on her face. "Your father made me promise to stay away. He thought I was using you for the money. He said he'd make my life in the fire. Department a living hell if I didn't stop talking to you." Ethan's expression hardened. "What did my father do?" Before Amanda could answer, Richard Morrison appeared, having rushed to the scene as soon as he heard that his son was in the burning building. When he saw Ethan on the ground, being examined by paramedics, his face paled. "Ethan, thank God you're all right. I was so worried." Ethan looked at his father with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "You threatened Amanda. You forced her out of my life because you thought she was using me." Richard seemed genuinely shocked. "I was protecting you. She needed money and you. She just risked her life to save me," Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp. "She carried me up 22 flights of a damaged fire escape when she could have left me there and waited for help. She almost died because she wasn't going to abandon me. Is this the person you accused of using me for money?" Richard looked at Amanda, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a potential threat, but as the person who had just saved his son's life with extraordinary courage. She was covered in soot, clearly exhausted beyond normal human limits, but there was a strength and dignity in her that was impossible to ignore. "I made a mistake," he said slowly, the words obviously difficult for a man accustomed to always being right. "A terrible mistake. I judged you without knowing you, based only on numbers and assumptions." Amanda tried to stand up, but her legs still wouldn't cooperate. One of the paramedics helped her sit up properly, checking her vital signs with growing concern. "You need to go to the hospital," he said firmly. "You have significant smoke inhalation, and your muscles are in a critical state of exhaustion. You've pushed yourself way beyond what's safe. I'll go to the hospital later," Amanda said stubbornly. "First I need to know that Ethan is okay." Ethan reached out, taking her hand. "I'm okay because of you. Now please go. Get treatment." He looked at his father. "And we're going to have a very long talk about boundaries and respect." Amanda finally agreed to go to the ambulance, but before the paramedics took her away, she looked at Richard again. "I never wanted your money, Mr. Morrison. I just wanted a friend, someone who understood me, and Ethan was that to me. The transfer he made was his idea, not mine, and I intended to pay back every penny. But more than the money, I lost someone who meant a lot to me when you forced me out of your life." Richard nodded slowly. "I see that now, and I will do everything in my power to make amends for the harm I caused." He paused. "Including ensuring your mother receives the best treatment available, at no cost to you, not as charity, but as an apology for my arrogance and misjudgment." The following weeks were a whirlwind of changes. Amanda spent 3 days in the hospital recovering from severe smoke inhalation and muscle exhaustion. Ethan visited her daily, and they finally had the conversations they should have had months before. They talked about what their friendship meant, how much they had missed each other, and about the future. Richard kept his promise, arranging for Amanda's mother to be transferred to the best rehabilitation center in New York, with all costs covered by a fund he established specifically for first responder families facing medical difficulties. It was his way of turning his mistake into something positive, of creating a system that would help others in Amanda's situation. Ethan's rescue made Amanda a local hero. The story of a firefighter carrying a man in a wheelchair up 22 flights of a damaged fire escape captured the city's imagination. She received several commendations, including the department's Medal of Valor, the highest honor the FDNY could bestow. But for Amanda, the real reward wasn't the medals or public recognition. It was having Ethan back in her life. It was seeing her mother progress in physical therapy, slowly regaining function on her right side. It was the unexpectedly close relationship she developed with Richard, who became a fierce advocate for her work and career. 6 months after the fire, Amanda and Ethan were sitting at the same table in the cafe where it had all begun. The reserved sign was still there, but now Amanda knew it was reserved for Ethan, the commissioner's son, a disability rights advocate, and most importantly, her best friend. "Have you ever thought about how all this happened because you sat at the wrong table?" Ethan said with a smile. Amanda laughed, picking up her coffee. "It wasn't the wrong table. It was exactly the right table at the right time. Sometimes the best mistakes are the ones that aren't really mistakes." Amanda's mother had regained 60% function on her right side, and doctors were optimistic about further improvements. Amanda's debts were being paid off through a reasonable payment plan arranged with Richard's help, and she had found something she didn't know she was missing: a genuine connection with someone who understood her completely. Richard learned a valuable lesson about making hasty judgments and about underestimating both his son and the people his son chose to have in his life. The fund he created had already helped 12 first aid families, transforming his initial mistake into something meaningful and lasting. As for Amanda and Ethan, their friendship continued to grow, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared experiences, and a deep understanding that sometimes life's most important connections come from the most unexpected places. She was still a firefighter, still saving lives, but now she had a support system that strengthened her. And Ethan had someone in his life who never saw him as limited, only as Ethan, the complete and capable person he had always been. Their story proved that challenges can be overcome. Courage comes in many forms, and sometimes sitting at the wrong table is exactly what you need to find the right path.